The story of Joshua's leadership and the conquest of Canaan is a pivotal chapter in Israel's history, fulfilling God's long-standing promise to give his people a land of their own. After the death of Moses, God spoke directly to Joshua, giving him the charge to lead the Israelites into the land of Canaan. God promised Joshua that he would be with him just as he had been with Moses, and urged him to be strong and courageous. In Joshua 1:1-9, God laid out specific instructions for Joshua, emphasizing the importance of obedience to the law that Moses had given. The Lord also reassured Joshua that wherever the Israelites set foot, he would give them the land. God said to Joshua, "Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go." Joshua accepted the mantle of leadership, and the people of Israel prepared to cross into Canaan. One of the first challenges Joshua faced was the crossing of the Jordan River, which was at flood stage, making it impassable by ordinary means. However, God provided a miracle similar to the parting of the Red Sea under Moses. He instructed Joshua that the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which symbolized God's presence, should step into the Jordan. As soon as the priest's feet touched the water, the river stopped flowing and the Israelites crossed on dry ground. This miraculous event confirmed Joshua's divine appointment as Israel's leader, just as the parting of the Red Sea had affirmed Moses' leadership. Once the people had crossed the Jordan, Joshua had set them up a memorial with 12 stones taken from the riverbed, one for each tribe of Israel, to commemorate God's faithfulness and miraculous provision. The first major city the Israelites encountered after crossing the Jordan was Jericho, a heavily fortified city with strong walls. Rather than using traditional military strategies, God gave Joshua specific and unusual instructions for taking the city. In Joshua 6, God instructed Joshua that for 6 days the Israelites were to march around the city once each day, with 7 priests carrying trumpets made of ram's horns in front of the Ark of the Covenant. On the 7th day, they were to march around the city 7 times, and then the priests were to blow their trumpets, and the people were to shout. When they did this, the walls of Jericho would collapse. Joshua and the Israelites followed these instructions exactly. For 6 days they marched in silence, and on the 7th day, after marching around the city 7 times, they blew their trumpets, and Joshua commanded the people to shout. As soon as they did, the walls of Jericho fell down miraculously. The Israelites entered the city and destroyed everything inside, as God had commanded. Only Rahab, a prostitute who had sheltered the Israelite spies, and her family were spared because of her faithfulness in hiding the spies. This victory at Jericho was significant because it demonstrated that the conquest of Canaan would be achieved through God's power and not by human strength. However, God gave strict instructions that all the silver, gold, bronze, and iron from Jericho were to be dedicated to his treasury. The Israelites were not to take anything for themselves. After the miraculous victory at Jericho, Joshua set his sights on the next city, Ai. Unlike Jericho, Ai was a much smaller and less fortified city, so Joshua sent a smaller force to attack it. However, to their surprise, the Israelites were defeated and about 36 men were killed. This unexpected loss caused great fear and confusion among the Israelites. Joshua was devastated by the defeat and sought the Lord's guidance. God revealed that Israel had sinned by breaking the covenant. Achan, an Israelite, had taken some of the devoted items from Jericho, things that were supposed to be dedicated to God, and hidden them in his tent. This disobedience brought judgment on the entire community and caused God to withdraw his protection. God said to Joshua, "Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions." Joshua followed God's instructions to identify the guilty person by casting lots. The lot fell on Achan, who confessed to taking a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold. He had hidden them in his tent. Achan's sin had serious consequences. He, along with his family, were taken to the valley of Achor, where they were stoned to death, and their possessions were burned. This act of judgment was necessary to remove the sin from the community and restore God's favor. With Achan's sin addressed, God gave Joshua a new strategy to conquer Ai. This time, Joshua set an ambush for the city. He divided his forces, sending part of the army to hide behind the city, while the rest approached Ai from the front. When the king of Ai saw the Israelites, he led his army out to engage them, thinking he would defeat them again. Joshua and his forces pretended to retreat, drawing the men of Ai away from the city. At this moment, the hidden Israelite forces entered Ai from the rear and set the city on fire. When the men of Ai saw the smoke rising, they realized they had been trapped. Joshua's main force turned and attacked, and the Israelites completely defeated the people of Ai. This victory at Ai was an important turning point. It demonstrated that the Israelites' success depended entirely on God's favor and blessing. When sin was removed from the camp, Israel could once again experience victory. After the victory at Ai, Joshua led the Israelites in a covenant renewal ceremony at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, as Moses had instructed. Joshua built an altar to the Lord, offered sacrifices, and wrote the law of Moses on large stones. The Israelites gathered, and Joshua read aloud the blessings and the curses of the covenant, renewing their commitment to follow God's commands. This ceremony was significant because it reminded the people that their success in Canaan was directly tied to their faithfulness to God and His covenant. It reinforced the importance of obedience as they continued their conquest. As news of Israel's victory spread, other nations in Canaan became fearful. The Gibeonites, who lived nearby, resorted to deception to make peace with Israel. They disguised themselves as travelers from a distant land and approached Joshua, asking him to make a treaty with them. Without seeking God's counsel, Joshua agreed to their treaty, only to discover later that the Gibeonites were actually their neighbors. Although Joshua could not break the treaty, the Gibeonites were made servants to the Israelites, tasked with carrying wood and water from the community. This event taught Joshua and the Israelites the importance of always seeking God's guidance before making decisions. With much of central Canaan under Israel's control, Joshua next focused on the southern and northern regions. In the south, a coalition of 5 Amorite kings banded together to fight Israel. Joshua led his army into battle, and during the Battle of Gibeon, God performed another miracle. At Joshua's request, God caused the sun to stand still, giving the Israelites more daylight to complete their victory. In the northern campaign, Joshua faced another coalition of kings led by Jabin, king of Hazor. God again delivered these enemies into Joshua's hands, and the Israelites conquered the northern territories. Throughout these campaigns, the Bible emphasizes that it was the Lord who fought for Israel. Despite the size and strength of their armies, God granted them victory because they followed His commands. After the major military victories, Joshua turned to the task of dividing the conquered land among the 12 tribes of Israel. This process is described in detail in Joshua 13-21. Each tribe received a portion of the land as their inheritance, fulfilling the promise God had made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Joshua also set up cities of refuge, where individuals who accidentally killed someone could flee for protection and receive a fair trial. Additionally, he allocated Levitical cities for the priestly tribe of Levi, ensuring that the Levites were spread throughout Israel to serve the people. As Joshua neared the end of his life, he gathered the people of Israel at Shechem for a final address. He reminded them of God's faithfulness in bringing them into the land of Canaan and warned them against worshipping the false gods of the nations around them. In Joshua 23:24, Joshua urged the people to remain faithful to the Lord. He famously declared, "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." The people responded by renewing their commitment to serve God, and Joshua set up a large stone as a witness to this covenant renewal. Joshua died at the age of 110, and was buried in the land of his inheritance. The Bible records that Israel remained faithful to the Lord throughout Joshua's lifetime and the lifetimes of the elders who outlived him. Joshua's leadership was characterized by faithfulness, courage, and obedience to God. The conquest of Canaan was more than a series of military victories. It was a spiritual journey that required the Israelites to trust in God's power and guidance. Through Joshua, God fulfilled his promise to give the descendants of Abraham the land of Canaan. The stories of Jericho and Ai illustrate powerful lessons about faith, obedience, and the consequences of sin. At Jericho, the Israelites experienced miraculous victory because they trusted in God and followed his instructions. However, the defeat at Ai showed how disobedience, Achan's sin, could bring disaster. Once the sin was dealt with, God's favor was restored and victory followed. Joshua's life and leadership remind us that true success comes from God's strength, not human effort, and that he is faithful to fulfill his promises, even when the journey seems impossible.